Greetings, this is Griff Ruby, the Nostalgic Catholic, with what is here, in fact, Isaac Asimov's last appearance on the magazine, or perhaps I should say the successor of the magazine, which once upon a time was Astounding Story, then when he was contributing it to it, Astounding Science Fiction, but had now become Science Fiction and Science Fact analog. But it still had some continuity, kind of continuity. Of course, John Campbell has been gone for a long time. In fact, this story is headed off with a very nice tribute to their time working together between Asimov and John Campbell, which I will read shortly. But this magazine marks the last appearance of Isaac Asimov on the pages of this magazine. Fortunately, it looks like he gets the cover. There are some beings, one of which is kind of cubical, so maybe that's it. Another maybe kind of spherical or obloid. Maybe there's something like that in there, and something else has another shape that could be kind of hinted at by some of the colors in there. And then the lines kind of makes it look pretty neat. 50th anniversary for Isaac Asimov. Gold, look at that. Even the letters are a goldish color. So that's done and said. Let's take a look at this story here. So first of all, mention it in the table of contents. There it is. Novelettes, actually gold. Isaac Asimov, page 10. Now, let's see what we find on page 10 is an interesting piece of artwork. Now, these characters here are apparently supposed to be King Lear and somebody in his court. And then there's kind of the world there. And we'll find out why we'd have King Lear from the Shakespearean play in the artwork. But first, let's read the blurb that comes on the other page here. So it's an open letter to the late John Wood Campbell Jr. But he's been gone. But anyway, in fact, you see that from the letter. So here's what it says. Dear John, 50 years ago this month, you published my story Nightfall in the September 1941 issue of Astounding Science Fiction. The story was mine, but the idea was yours. For several years, I wrote stories under your kindly and gentle but steel-firm guidance, and I owe you all that has happened to me since. 20 years ago, you died at the age of 61. I have missed you every day of those 20 years, and I wish you could have lived to see this golden anniversary of ours. It was possible. You would have been only 81. But alas, I must celebrate it alone. And so I have written a story for you, John. I had to do it without your help, which is a terrible disadvantage, but I have done my best. Thank you once again, John, for everything, and in honor of the anniversary, I call the story Gold. So, we have this producer kind of person. I guess this is supposed to be kind of the future of producing movies. So you'd have characters all computerized so that they don't have to take a breath between their lines. They can express things and sound more than human or whatever else, or interesting combinations of voices. Jonas Willard. So he's kind of like a producer fellow, and he's working with these actors and scenery persons and music and other people that are going to create, well, in the first part of it, they're working on a King Lear movie based on Shakespeare's play King Lear, hence the King Lear characters. And there's some hashing and thrashing about with everybody he's working with because he's a real perfectionist and he really wants everything just right. And apparently his efforts paid off. He sounds almost as finicky as who's that producer? Very famous. Well, it'll come to me, I think. I hope. I want to make 2001. Worked with Arthur C. Clarke to make the 2001 movie. Stanley Kubrick, that's the name. With an almost Stanley Kubrick-like attention to detail. But he has everybody do it until they get it exactly right, and then it is exactly right. And apparently his production of King Lear is a true classic, a high mark of production, of theater, of viewing, whatever. Well, that's just kind of setting the stage. Okay. For what's to come next, is he's approached by a writer who is only given the name of, let's see, he has a name. He's coming along, he's doing all this stuff. The writer comes in. Laborian. Gregory Laborian. Okay. Gregory Laborian is a writer who's got a story he wants to see turned into a movie. He wants to call it 3-in-1, and it's about a species of beings, alien beings, in a whole alternate parallel universe who have 3 genders. And if you've heard some of my other reviews, or better still read one of his books known as The Gods Themselves, it is in fact very, very closely and tightly associated with the gods themselves. That said, it is an interesting review of, suppose somebody were to try to make a movie of the gods themselves. Now, if you remember, that story was in 3 parts. The first part and the third would be pretty straightforward. No big deal, not really. Because they're just human beings, either on the Earth or in the other case on the Moon. So that's 2 of our 3 worlds. It's this middle section where you've got these weird alien beings that are very alien. Because you see, you have these 3 genders. You have the parental, which in that story had the name of Trit. You had the emotional, which in that universe had the name of Dua. And then you had the rational, which had the name of Odin. You may remember that. If you've ever read The Gods Themselves by Isaac Asimov, or at least its middle section, which is generally seen as the main show stealer of the book. So, but how would you actually put these things into the movie? Because there's almost nothing that describes any of these characters in any much of a way at all. Let alone, what does it mean when they melt? And how would you put that on the screen? And then sometimes they have that final permanent melting that results in another kind of being that's like all 3 combined, known as a hard one. And what does that look like? Well, you have to try to imagine all of that. And I think that really brings up a fascinating question of, suppose you really wanted to make a movie of an Asimovian story and to follow that movie really well. So far, I've only seen one that actually seems to make a serious and reasonable attempt at this, but it's almost unheard of, and that is The Life and Times of Multivac. The BBC made some, half-hour, hour-long movie of that. It's fairly short and sweet, but it's the story, and whatever differences there are really don't hurt the story. They basically followed it, and it's a nice story. It's nice to see. That being the case, how is this going to be done? The whole science of what does it take to go from a story to a film? The medias are different. The way you have to describe things are different. There are just some things that have to be different. But does that mean you gotta mess around with a story like was done with his Nightfall, what was done with his iRobot, and what is still being done with his Foundation series? I think this is kind of shown that is not necessary. Because even this middle section of the gods themselves, which clearly presents far vaster challenges than any of those other books, and all of them put together, have presented to an actual serious filmmaker. And yet, you come out of this almost feeling like it might actually be doable. So, there it is. This story, by the way, is also gathered up into his collection, Gold. So you can see it there. And you can see the Gold is available, and it's a hardback. I always like to show the hardbacks, but there's also paperbacks. So it's readily obtainable. And how well it works, and some of the solutions arrived at. And there was even a mention of gold as a form of payment being offered at one point. Actual, literal, physical gold. Apparently, they got these electronic monies, but there's also you could pay in gold. And apparently, literal, physical gold, despite being dollar-wise the same amount of money, somehow has a quality to it. Of course, it doesn't inflate. But it doesn't get into all that. It's just the gold was really intriguing and motivated our producer to go the extra mile to try to turn such a story into a movie or movie-like production, whatever it is exactly he's actually doing. And then there's a neat little thing at the end that I won't spoil. It's in the story, in the magazine, in the book. I'm sure the paperback's the same. So, I don't know. It is a read that requires a little more patience than some of his others. But I think it does. But I really like that it brings up that whole aspect of how would you portray a written story, into a film. And it addresses that issue to some degree. Well, in that sense, it is, I think, personally very interesting. Well, thanks for listening. We will never see Isaac Asimov on the pages of Astounding Story, Astounding Science Fiction, Analog Science Fiction, Science Fact, all that same publication, ever again. This itself appeared in the September 1991 issue. So, he hasn't long to live, if indeed he lives to see this. He is drawing at the end of his life, as I am drawing at the end of these stories. But I still have a few more. Thanks for listening.